A lot of customers who come into Midwest Mountaineering, most of the time, don't understand really what we say when we're talking about arch support and volume. And it's kind of an education process, which is okay. But in this video, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna talk a little bit more about what we mean when we say arch support and what we say when we say volume, and how that translates into what is going on the inside of the foot, okay, or inside the footwear. Arch support, for lack of a better phrase, is the curvature of your foot. So if we're talking about the way your foot is made, right in here on the interior of your foot, not the posterior foot, but the interior of your foot, you have basically a curvature of this inside arch of your foot. And the higher the arch, generally the more support you need. The lower the arch, generally the less support you need. And then obviously folks are in between. So when we say arch, that's what we're talking about. When we say support, it depends on where you land on that scale. Are you more of a high arch individual where you've got really high arches, or are you low arches? And the reason we say support is because if we take a shoe that doesn't have significant arch support, and I'll get into examples on different footwear and kind of what you're going to see when you put on that footwear from the get-go. If you have a insole or a piece of footwear that has almost no support on the inside of the foot, right? So where your foot actually hits the bottom of that footwear. When you compress your foot on the ground, it's gonna basically compress that entire part of your foot, right? It's gonna do that. If there's no support here, that entire middle of your foot is gonna compress every single time you step down. And that is gonna put a significant amount of strain on the overall part of your foot, because the majority of your bones in your foot that connect everything is right here. And that's right where your arch is. Right? So the more compression you have in that part of your foot every time you're stepping down, this is not just on one foot, this is on both feet, you're going to end up developing significant amount of long-term issues. Now that could eventually become, it sometimes will result in plantar fasciitis or other types of foot issues or foot problems, but a lot of it can stem from not getting arch support from the very beginning when you first start wearing shoes. Now, when you're younger, and your feet are still growing and your body's still growing, you haven't really defined exactly what the arch is going to look like. Usually by about your mid-teens, 15, 16, your arch is pretty much developed into what it's going to be. And so you pretty much have an idea of, okay, I know when I get to buying footwear, whether it's just walking around town, or I'm buying a hiking shoe or a hiking boot, or a trail runner, or even a sandal, believe it or not, I know what I'm going to need in that support. And even wearing sandals too, you need the support you want on a footwear versus going with just a straight flat sandal. Flip-flops are great, but sometimes they can cause big problems. When we're talking about different types of footwear and we're looking at boots as they come straight out of the box, how do we know that a boot is going to have enough support for us from the very beginning, or if we're going to have to get something aftermarket to mitigate that? And believe it or not, it's not on the outside what counts, it's on the inside. So if you look at this is a cutoff shoe of a La Sportiva. If you look at this, at least from this side, there's a significant amount of arch here, right? So right when looking at this shoe, I'm like, this is gonna give me so much arch support. I'm gonna have, my feet are gonna be golden, especially if I need a lot of support. The reality is when you turn that around and you look at the inside of the shoe, all right, this, which is gonna be your actual insole, this is almost flat. The entirety of that inside of that shoe is almost flat. There is no curvature almost at all on the interior of that foot. And for that matter, the insole itself generally is not going to be as supportive. Okay? Now, if you take other examples, right, again, using La Sportiva, they're great. I love their shoes. So same thing here, right? The Ultra Raptor 4, great shoe, awesome backpacking boot and hiking boot. Has a significant curvature in the arch and the outsole. So my mind tells me this is going to be great for those that need higher arch support, right? Great curvature, even the inside. Great curvature where my arch is going to be. I'm going to have a lot of support in this shoe. Well, not necessarily, because the inside of this shoe looks almost identical to the inside of that shoe. And when you pull that insole out, it's just a flexible piece of foam. It does have the curvature of the arch here, and you can see what it's designed to do, but there's no support at all because it's so flexible. Then I take the other extreme, right? If we're looking at, say, like a Vask, right? This is the Vask LNT Breeze. This is straight flat in the bottom. There's no defined arch on the sole, right? But again, what we're talking about is not the outside of the sole, it's the inside of the sole. It's the inside where your foot is actually hitting that boot. And if I, again, take that insole out, you know, if I compare these two, right, even from the onset, the La Sportiva one should give me way more support than the Vask, just because of the curvature of that arch, especially if I have high arches. But again, this is a super pliable foam. And there isn't going to be, especially if you're collapsing that arch every single time you're stepping down, right? It's not going to give you the support you need. It's going to conform to the shoe, and the shoe, relatively on the inside, is going to be relatively flat. There is some arch support here, but again, this part right here is also super pliable. So if you need a significant, if you have high arches, and you're going to be wearing a shoe like this because it's comfortable, but you need to mitigate it to help support your high arches, then there are ways of doing that. And that's where we get into aftermarket insoles. Now these can be either branded products that we're going to show you in a minute, like Superfeet, or they could be prescribed orthotics, either one. If we're getting into using those types of aftermarket products, what are we looking for? This relates to volume too, which I'll touch on in a second. But if I have high arches, I want that same type of support that I would find in this normally, but in a much stiffer, less pliable piece of material, right? So I still have the pliability up here in the toes. That's because, again, I'm walking like this. The support here, where that arch support is needed, is not pliable at all. It's nice and stiff. It basically locks my arch into where it needs to be. So I'm not going to compress this part of my arch right here. So I don't have that issue, right, of compressing those bones on my feet, all right? One other thing that Superfeet will do too, regardless if you have high arches or low arches, this will also fill up the boot. So now it's a good segue into the next topic, which is volume. Okay, when we talk about volume, what do we mean by volume? We talked about arch support. What do we mean by volume? Volume really pertains to any sort of modification of the existing boot in relationship to how your feet are going to fit into that boot and how much space your physical foot will take up in that particular shoe. Okay? One of the previous videos we talked about a boot being too tight or too loose, okay, and want it to be comfortable. Generally, if you have a boot that's too tight, that means that the volume that that shoe can accept, or the capacity level that shoe can accept, is a little bit too small compared to the size of your foot. Now, it's not just a length. We're not talking about like size 13 to size 10. That generally pertains to the length, although it does relate to volume. This is more of just the upper part of the boot and how much space that boot can take, okay? And if we are modifying that boot with an insole of any kind, whether it be a Superfeet or an orthotic, the more, like for example, the green, which is Superfeet's most common and most popular one, this not only has a high arch support, but it also has a high volume. High volume means as soon as I put this into a boot, say this Vask Breeze LNT, as soon as I put that in here, that significantly reduces the amount of space inside the boot for my foot to fit in it. So if I am feeling relatively comfortable in, say, a size 10 in this boot, but I need that high arch support, I might want to go up to a size 10.5 or a size 11. But I want to try that with the insoles inside the boot. Now, luckily at Midwest Mountaineering here, we have a plethora of sizes of the different versions of Superfeet, so you actually physically can walk around with these in your shoes or your boots around the store to get a sense of how they're going to feel. Because again, what we don't want, even though we're modifying, if it's perfect, if it feels great right out the gate without the insole, and you're like, I need that extra support, or I need just a little bit more support because I have relatively low arches, but for some reason that insole that I get in there is just not giving me what I need. We want to basically have you put this in there and walk around with it, because no matter what, whether you go with a green or a carbon, right? Carbon is going to be the low arch, low volume version of Superfeet. I'm still going to be filling up that boot just a little bit. And so what I don't want to do is I don't want to now risk the boot being too tight once I throw one of these super feet in. Okay, so that's what we're talking about volume. We're talking about volume is, using math, as our way of describing it. Volume is the amount of space my foot takes up in that boot, whether I'm talking about the boot right out of the box or whether I'm talking about after modifications. There are a number of companies, as I mentioned also in one of the previous videos, that do really good. They have done a really good job of modifying their insoles right out of the box. And I'm going to call out Oboz because they've done a fantastic job. They actually have a really fantastic insole that comes with all of their shoes, which is why Oboz is one of the most popular brands of shoes that we sell. One, they still have a pliable toe in here, much like you get with Superfeets, right? But the back end is not as pliable. It's much more supportive. It still a little bit is because, again, we're not talking about a plastic cap on the bottom of the Superfeet, right, to hold in that and lock in that arch support. But it's a significant better product than something that comes out of the box that does this, okay? So I get that arch support I want. I also have a lot of cushion, both under the balls of my feet as well as in the back of my heel. Now, so one of the things that actually Superfeet doesn't have is that I have the cushion I want where I'm doing most of my impact, but a lot of times some folks actually walk heel to toe. And so there is some impact that happens in the back end of the heel as well. So Oboz is actually putting some of the soft cushion foam on the back side of the insole. Actually helps improve the cushioning you get when you walk. Between the two, they're both fantastic, right? But for an insole to be made like this right out of the box for any of Oboz's shoes is a huge step in the right direction, so I had to call them out. So not every shoe that you buy is going to have a really pliable insole. Some of them are going to come with really great insoles right out of the box. Another thing that I didn't mention is when we talk about certain drops, when we say zero drop or half drop or a full drop, what does that mean? Most common when we're talking about drop is usually resulting with trail runners. All right, trail runners, generally most of them are going to have either a zero drop or a half drop, right? Zero drop being ultra is being one of the most common, is that there is, as you can tell on the shoe, there is no arch at all. And on the inside, it's the exact same thing. If I pull this insole out, there is no arch at all in that insole, right? That's a zero drop shoe. If I have high arches and I need that additional support, I might still go with the green. I may not go with this one because this is primarily used for hiking. Or if I want to, I can go with the Adapt. Adapt version is a newer version that Superfeet came out that actually, believe it or not, adapts to your foot. One thing I might do is if I really want a zero drop, I love the cushion in this shoe, I want that flat material, but I need a little bit more support than I would get with just the arch that's in here. There's two ways of going about it. One is to, unfortunately, look at a different shoe that has more of an arch support in it. It is not a zero drop shoe. Or, again, using Superfeet as an example, I can take an insole that's designed for trail runners. So I still get the cushioning and the feeling I want out of a zero drop shoe, but I still have the arch support that I need, and I have that impact foam that I want on the actual insole. So as I'm running, right, I'm putting my foot down like this and I'm pushing forward, I have most of the impact foam on the front edge of that shoe. So choosing the best boot that specifically works going to wear really well with your particular foot, depending if you have high arches or low arches or somewhere in between. One of the best things you can do to, one, if you don't know that, is to come and visit one of us here at Minneapolis Mountaineering, or actually a different foot store, or even better, if you have the opportunity and you want to know more, is actually visit with a foot doctor. Believe it or not, there are foot doctors out there, and they're going to give you a lot more information on kind of how your foot is designed. I mean, we're experts in particularly relating to hiking boots, hiking shoes, trail runners, and how that foot is going to work with a particular brand or model of footwear. But I'll be honest, I'm not a foot doctor. I know general anatomy and how it works in relationship to feet and footwear and types of footwear, both in the knowledge I've done and just experience in wearing shoes. But if you're really concerned and you have particular issues, some types of parts of your feet, whether it be your balls of your feet, your heel, things like that, just in general, I highly recommend to go visit a foot doctor. Because they're going to give you at least really good suggestions on what you're going to need regardless of what shoes you're getting, whether it be hiking boots or hiking shoes or even just general office shoes. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and I hope it answered a few different questions. We'll see you in the store at some point and we'll see you on the trail.